I study in class 12, and my address is in Matihar, a village in the Nawabganj police station area of Dinajpur district. The incident took place 12 years ago with my cousin. First, let me describe my aunt's house. Right in front of my aunt's house is a vast school field, and next to the field flows a river. I don't know the name of the river, and beside the river is the road that leads into the village. On the side of the road are two large palm trees. My uncle's house was right next to my aunt's house, and there was a family cemetery nearby. Since childhood, my cousin had been living with us. One day, my whole family, including my cousin, went to my aunt's house. We were going to stay for 2 days and then return to our home. The next day after returning home, I noticed some changes in my cousin. I must mention that I really like sweets, so there was always sweets in our house. When I opened the fridge to eat some sweets, I found that the sweet box was empty. Being a child, I started screaming. My cousin then said, I ate the sweets, but not all of them. What was surprising was that my cousin never called me by name, and she didn't like sweets at all, yet she had eaten the entire box of sweets. This was the first incident. After that, my father didn't bring any sweets for 2 days. Then the next strange thing happened. 2 days after that, my mother noticed that my cousin had eaten an entire kilogram of sugar straight from the packet in the kitchen. My mother was terrified, but she didn't say anything to her. That night, when my cousin went to sleep, my mother told my father about what had happened. Since I was still young, I stayed in the same room as my parents, while my own sister and cousin stayed in another room. My own sister was 2.5 years older than me, so to avoid confusion, I'll refer to my cousin as the older sister and my sister as the younger one. Now, coming back to the incident, that night, my younger sister suddenly screamed. The sound woke everyone up, and we rushed to her room. What we saw, we were not prepared for at all. We found my older sister biting herself with her hands, drawing blood and eating it. When my father tried to stop her, my father, who is a retired soldier from the Bangladesh Army, was having a hard time. But strangely, my father couldn't remove her left hand from her mouth, even though he was holding it with his right hand. After a lot of effort, my father finally managed to pull her away. We all realized this must be something supernatural. So my father called the imam from the nearby mosque. The imam came and placed his hands on my older sister's body, then greeted her and asked, "What do you want? Why are you hurting this girl?" My older sister replied in a heavy voice, "I want to eat sweets." The imam asked again, "Where?" And she repeated, "I want to eat sweets." After asking repeatedly, she kept saying the same thing. So finally, the imam said, "If you want sweets, then I'll get them for you." At 2 a.m., when the market was closed, my father called my older brother, who was a sweet maker, and asked him to bring 2 kilograms of sweets. When the sweets arrived, my older sister smiled. Before we could understand what was happening, in 5 or 7 minutes, she ate all the sweets. We were completely shocked. How could she possibly eat all that? Then the imam began asking questions. "Where are you from?" The answer was, "I was passing through here, and I noticed this girl." "What is the connection with the palm trees?" The answer was, "I was near the palm trees by your aunt's house." Then the imam asked why she had come, and the reply was, "I liked this girl, so I brought her here." The imam tried to reason with the spirit, but it wouldn't leave. Eventually, the spirit asked for another 3 kilograms of sweets. My father agreed, and after a while, the spirit broke a large branch of the mango tree next to the house and left. A few days later, my older sister told my mother that she was learning to pray in a dream and reading the Quran. From then on, the spirit would possess her regularly, but her torment only grew worse. About a month after the earlier incident, my older sister told my mother she was hungry, and my mother went to prepare something for her. When she came to check on her, my older sister was asleep. After an hour, she woke up and said, "I've already eaten." My mother was very surprised. My sister explained that a boy and a girl had appeared before her in a dream. The boy used to teach her the Quran, and they took her to an unknown place with mountains, rivers, and seas. There, a lot of people were eating and having fun. The boy fed her until she couldn't eat anymore, and then someone remarked that they were eating too little. My mother thought it was just a dream, but my sister was convinced it wasn't. Then my mother shared the story with my father, and they called a big healer. When the healer arrived and learned the full story, he said that the spirit was taking my sister to its realm. He performed some rituals with water and oil, but nothing improved. Then they called the healer again, and he managed to bring the spirit in front of them. The healer told the spirit to leave my sister, but it refused. At that moment, my uncle told the spirit, "This drama won't work with me." The spirit became angry and said to my uncle, "Keep your eyes open tonight and you'll see." That night, no one could sleep. At around 1 a.m., my uncle opened his eyes and saw a figure in white standing in front of him, its height reaching the ceiling. My uncle was terrified. Then he heard the voice of the spirit saying, "Do you want to see more drama?" Later, my older sister got married to a police officer. But the strange incidents didn't stop. Whenever my brother-in-law came home on leave, the same problem started. However, after a year of marriage, everything started to settle down, and my older sister had a big baby. Everyone, please pray for them. Let's move on to the next incident. Today, the story I'm going to tell you is about my father. Let me inform you that we have been living in a hilly region of Bangladesh for almost 30 years. Currently, I am working in the marketing sector, so I'm unable to disclose my full identity. My father, Muhammad Arif Ahmed, was a Nurani healer by profession. He was such a great person that he never demanded even a single penny in return for his work. Alhamdulillah, my father was not only approached by Muslims for treatment, but also by the local Christians, Hindus, and Buddhists. People from every religion sought treatment from him. My father would provide solutions to their problems and, if necessary, give them amulets. He would also blow over water, which helped many people. Day by day, his popularity increased, and so did the number of patients. I have asked my father many times, "Abu, how do you perform this treatment?" He used to say, "Son, I have good jinns who are my friends, and by Allah's command, they help me do this work." I had a habit of never watching my father's treatment sessions with my own eyes. Whenever he finished seeing patients, I would leave the room. This was because of one terrifying experience I had. One day, a woman came to my father with her family for treatment. I was in the room at that time. As my father began the treatment, after a while, a jinn was summoned into the woman. What can I say? It felt as if she was on the verge of dying. Foam started coming out of her mouth, and she was screaming so loudly that it seemed as if her breath was running out. After witnessing this scene, I became extremely scared. Today, someone was almost dying. Tomorrow, another person would be possessed. Watching these things made my environment truly terrifying. From that day onwards, I never stayed with my father during his treatments. I wouldn't even stay at home at those times. One day, I came home a little early. As soon as I entered the house, I heard terrible noises coming from my father's room. Fearfully, I went inside to look. There, a patient had turned into a complete madman. His voice was horribly rough. Hearing the sound made my entire body break out in sweat. Looking at him, it seemed as if he wasn't speaking, but rather screaming. As I was passing by my father's room, that patient suddenly turned towards me, gave a ghastly smile, and jumped at me. He threw me to the ground and climbed onto my chest. I was so terrified that I completely froze. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the patient's face was right in front of mine. His eyes were terrifying and full of darkness. He was staring at me strangely. His tongue had stuck out of his mouth, and he started licking my head. At that moment, my condition was such that I closed my eyes and just kept screaming. With great difficulty, my father and the others present there managed to pull the patient off me. But even as he was being taken away, he kept looking at me and tried to say something in a strange voice, which I couldn't understand. But it was clear and distinct. That person was actually from a local Christian family, but he was speaking fluent Arabic. His accent was so perfect that it felt like he had come straight from an Arab country. He was giving a terrifying smile and kept staring at me. Eventually, with great effort, my father and the patient's family members took him inside. After that, I ran to my room, locked the door, and collapsed onto my bed. My condition was miserable due to fear. After some time, when I felt a little normal, I quickly went to the bathroom, removed my clothes, and took a bath. The way he had licked my hair made me feel utterly disgusted with myself. I don't know how long I stayed in the bathroom. I just couldn't forget that incident in any way. That incident had traumatized me. A terrible fear had taken root inside me. I no longer liked my father doing such work. My patience was running out. That night I went to my father and said, "Abu, if you must continue this work, then rent another house. You don't have to do everything here. Don't you care about your own son? Or is your desire to be noble more important than that? Please stop doing all this work at home." Hearing my words, my father did not respond. My mother had passed away long ago, leaving us behind in this world. I had no siblings either. It was just my father and me at home. Many times I had argued with my father about this. "Abu, please stop doing this work. If you must, do it somewhere else." But my father never listened to me. No matter how much I said, it continued. I thought to myself, it won't always be like this. When patients come, I will just leave the house. It got to the point where sometimes I would be sleeping and suddenly a patient would arrive in the next room. Then terrifying screams and noises would start coming from there. Jinns would often possess the patients in that room. Let me tell you about one such day. That morning, I was sleeping in my room when suddenly someone knocked on my door. I thought my father had come to call me for something. I got up and opened the door to see a girl standing there. She spoke in a regional dialect and said, "Your father is calling you." I asked, "Who are you, Appa? And please tell him I will come after freshening up." Saying this, I closed the door. A little later, when I went to my father's room and asked him why he had sent a girl to call me, he replied, "I didn't call you. Why would I send someone to call you? I have never done this before." I said, "Abu, what are you saying? That girl came and called me herself. She even spoke to me." Hearing my words, my father remained silent as if he didn't want to say anything about it. Then suddenly he said, "Yes, I needed you for something. Maybe I sent someone to call you. But there was something very strange. How did that girl know my name? I don't know. One day, when I was returning home from college, as usual, my father was sitting in his room. The path to my house was such that I had to pass by my father's window to enter. I glanced through the window into my father's room, but he wasn't there. Instead, a woman wearing a burqa was sitting inside. She called me by my name and said, "Son, come here, listen to me." I thought she might be someone my father knew, and perhaps I knew her too. Since she was wearing a burqa, I couldn't recognize her. I assumed she had some work with my father. Anyway, when I approached her, she made me sit beside her and started caressing my head. And sitting down, he started talking in such a way as if he had done me a great favor. Then, in the course of conversation, he started asking me, "Son, why does your father do this work? Doesn't he know how dangerous this work is? Its impact can also fall on you." Hearing his words, I thought maybe he was showing me sympathy. I opened up my heart to him and said, "Auntie, I am tired of trying to make my father understand, but he doesn't want to listen to me." She said, "Yes, son, some fathers become such that they don't even think about their own children." Then she wanted to know, "All right, son, when did your mother pass away?" I said, "Auntie, I was very young when my mother passed away." I thought to myself, maybe she was an old acquaintance of my mother. So I asked, "Auntie, did you know my mother? And how do you know about her death?" She said, "Son, I was going to send you to your mother too. That's why I asked." At first, I couldn't understand what she meant, but when I realized the matter, I looked at her and started asking, "Auntie, what are you trying to say?" When I spoke, that woman turned towards me, and her voice had completely turned into a deep, masculine tone. Her eyelashes had lifted upwards. Then she started behaving with me exactly like a child. She said, "Oh, my dear son, do you want to go to your mother? Come, let me send you to your mother." I couldn't understand anything about what was happening to me. I felt as if the sky had fallen on my head. That woman's voice had turned into a terrifying, monstrous male voice. The next moment, that woman grabbed my throat tightly. With both hands, she started pressing against my neck. My breath was getting blocked. The patients around us got scared seeing this, but no one even tried to come between us to save me. That woman possessed some kind of monstrous strength. Even though I was a young man and did physical exercise, I couldn't free myself from that woman's grasp. The whole thing happened within 15 to 20 seconds. If my father hadn't come there at that moment and freed me, I might not have been here today to tell you this story. Anyway, after escaping from her hands, I left the house. It took me almost 4 to 5 hours to become normal again. I had made up my mind that today I would talk to my father. Either he would go somewhere else to do this work, or I would leave for another place. When I returned home at night, I saw that my father was sitting on a chair with a very ashamed look on his face. Seeing me, he apologized. I said, "Father, this is not the time for apologies. You have to decide now. Do you want to continue this, or should I leave?" Father said, "Son, today I will tell you the truth, why I don't live in a separate room, why I don't let you all live separately. I have drawn a boundary within this house. As long as you are inside this house, you are within the boundary. If you go far from home or gain independence from me, you will step out of this boundary. And you yourself have seen how dangerous this work is. These devils will not spare the children of the healer as revenge." Then I asked my father, "Why don't you just leave this work, Father?" He replied, "Son, since Allah has given me this knowledge, shouldn't I use it to help people?" That day, I didn't say anything further to my father. Then came the time of COVID. My father suddenly fell ill, and within 2 days of becoming sick, he passed away. This was a massive shock for me. It felt like everything had ended. Then my father's funeral took place, and he was buried. That was the first night of my life when I was completely alone in the house. I was deeply saddened by my father's passing. Being alone in the house, I was also a little scared. From around 1 to 1:30 at night, I remained awake. Just as I started feeling a bit sleepy, I heard a sound coming from my father's room. It was the same sound I used to hear when my father would get up at night to get water or for something else. The same sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. The most surprising thing was that the sound wouldn't stop. I didn't have the courage to go outside and see who was actually walking out there. That night, I stayed awake the whole time. In the morning, after the sunlight came out, I finally fell asleep and woke up around 1 p.m. That day, I didn't even go to college. When I came out of my room, I saw that everything was scattered and messy. I went into my father's room and became even more worried. His bedsheet was so disturbed that it seemed like someone had been there the whole night. The condition of the room was as if a storm had passed through it. Since just the day before, I had personally cleaned my father's room, arranged his clothes in the wardrobe, laid out the bedspread, and locked the room before leaving. I was shocked to see the state of the room. If I had locked the room myself, then who came inside and messed up the bed? Seeing all this, my fear increased even more. It was a strange mix of emotions for me. That night, after dinner, I lay down until around 12 a.m. because I didn't want to miss college again the next day. At 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up hearing my mobile ringtone. At first, I was terrified hearing the ringtone, but when I realized it was just my phone ringing, the fear lessened a bit. I looked at my phone and saw that it was exactly 2 a.m. It felt strange. I wondered who could be calling me so late at night. Since I had just woken up from sleep, my vision was a bit blurry at first. After a while, it became normal. Like usual, I rubbed my eyes a little and looked at my mobile screen. That's when my phone slipped from my hands and fell, because on the screen, my father's number was blinking. Can any of you listeners even imagine what my condition was at that moment? I had turned off my father's mobile and placed it in his wardrobe. Then who was calling me from that phone? The phone kept ringing for a long time, but I didn't have the courage to answer it. When the ringing finally stopped, I put my phone aside. All kinds of strange thoughts were coming to my mind. Maybe it was a cross connection or a network issue. Maybe someone else's number was mistakenly showing as my father's. 1,000 different thoughts were running through my head, but none of them seemed logical. Suddenly, I thought of checking if my father's phone was still in the wardrobe. Very nervously, I got out of bed and walked towards my father's room. I unlocked the door and moved towards the wardrobe. When I opened the wardrobe, the phone wasn't there. Seeing that the phone wasn't there, I felt a bit relieved. I convinced myself that maybe someone had stolen the phone when I had gone grocery shopping the day before. During COVID, many businesses were shutting down. People were losing jobs, and there were reports of theft in the area. Thinking this, I felt a little at peace. At least the phone was stolen, and by mistake, the thief must have called me. As I was heading back to bed, suddenly, my phone started blinking again with my father's number calling. Seeing my father's number calling again, I hesitantly answered. On the other side, I heard a deep, rumbling noise. I couldn't understand anything. It felt like the caller wasn't getting a good signal. I kept saying, "Hello, hello," for a long time, but no one answered. Another strange thing happened that I could hear someone's breathing from the other side of the phone, but the person who was breathing like that wasn't saying anything. Then suddenly the call got cut off. I called back, but from the other end I heard, "The number you have dialed is not available at this moment." At that point, I was sure it must have been the work of a thief. Maybe by accident, they pressed the wrong number and called me. But when I tried calling again, the phone was turned off. Then I put my phone beside my pillow and went to sleep. This time, I kept my phone on silent mode so I wouldn't wake up because of the phone ringing in the middle of the night. I slept that night, hoping to go to college the next day. The next morning when I checked my phone, I saw 150 missed calls from my father's number. Seeing so many calls, I called that number back, but no one responded. I thought I would go to college first and then go to the mobile company's office to block that number, showing them proof of the theft. After college, I went to the mobile company office and officially requested to block the number. After some time, they showed me their system and confirmed that my father's number was permanently blocked and no one could take that number again, nor would his SIM card work anymore. After this, I returned home, ate, and went to bed. Later, I went to the washroom to wash my face. When I came out, I heard my phone ringing again. I checked the phone and was terrified because the display showed my father's number again. Someone was calling me from that blocked number, but how was this possible? I suddenly picked up the call, and from the other side, I heard a horrifying sound. I am absolutely sure that the voice on the call was my father's voice. I screamed out his name but heard nothing but that same gurgling sound. It was like someone was just breathing on the phone. I quickly pressed the call recording button to record this sound. But before I could do that, the call got cut off. I thought maybe I was going crazy. How could my father call me? How could a dead person make a phone call? I had blocked that number already. What was happening to me? I checked the last call details from that number. It showed that the call duration was there, meaning I had really received the call and someone had indeed spoken to me. I went to the mobile company again the next day and showed them that the blocked number had called me. They were also surprised and worried. One of the officers showed me the system and said, "Sir, the status is blocked." I asked, "If the status is blocked, how did this call come through?" He replied, "We will send this case for further investigation to our head office." After leaving the office, I became increasingly worried. Maybe my father was still alive. Could he have been buried alive? My thoughts were all over the place. I couldn't make sense of anything. That night, I activated my mobile's auto call recording service so that any call would be recorded. I stayed awake all night, but no calls came through. I thought maybe I wasn't receiving any calls because the auto recording service was on. As soon as I turned off the recording, 5 minutes later, my father's number called again. I picked up the phone hesitantly, not turning on the recording this time because I was afraid that if I did, the person on the other side might hang up again. I listened carefully, and again I heard the same breathing sound. I screamed and asked, "Father, if you are alive, please let me know." After I finished asking, I heard a voice calling my name. Then the phone line went dead. My mind raced. Was someone playing a prank on me? Was the thief who stole the phone trying to impersonate my father to get something from me? The next day, I went to the mobile company again and requested them to track the phone's location. This process also involves the police. After all the procedures, I received the location of the phone. Despite being in a busy area, the location gave me a chill down my spine. I ran to the location where the phone was being tracked, but an unknown fear gripped me. The location turned out to be a cemetery where my father was buried. Let's move on to the next incident. If you would like to share with us an incident that happened to you or a true ghost story that you know of, please write or record the incident and send it to us by email. Our email address is ghoststreye@gmail.com, ghostsreye@gmail.com. If you would like to share with us an incident that happened to you or a true ghost story that you know of, please write or record the incident and send it to us by email. Our email address is ghoststreye@gmail.com, ghostsreye@gmail.com.